Blackness, not the peaceful kind, but a thick, swallowing dark that feels aware. A low, distorted hum rises beneath it, something like wind, something like breath. There are moments when history fractures, moments when something crosses a threshold it was never meant to cross. Long before anyone understood what had arrived, the sea already knew. Whitby, Yorkshire, crouches against the North Sea like an old man bracing for impact. On the morning of August 8th, 1897, its people woke with unease already lodged in their chests before they ever reached their windows. Dogs refused to bark. Church bells rang and sounded wrong, their echoes stretching too long. The air was heavy, thick, as if the night had left something behind. Out in the harbor, resting in the water like a corpse that refused to sink, sat a ship that did not belong. The night before had not been a storm, it had been an assault. Thunder detonated overhead with such force that glass cracked in its frames. Lightning tore open the sky again and again, revealing waves that looked less like water and more like walls of moving darkness. The sea roared with rhythm, not chaos, as though driven by intent. Fishermen would later say it sounded like something being forced forward. Wind screamed through streets and alleys, wrenching doors open, tearing signs loose, clawing at buildings as if searching for shelter or escape. And in the heart of that violence, something came in, not drifting, not limping, charging. The vessel tore through the harbor mouth at an unnatural speed. Its sails strained to the point of tearing. Its mast groaned like an animal under torture. Any sane captain would have turned back. Any ordinary ship would have broken apart. This one did neither. Its name was etched along the hull, the Demeter, a Russian schooner, a stranger, an intruder. When it slammed into the pier, the storm ended instantly. The wind died mid-scream. Rain ceased mid-fall. The sea fell silent as though its task had been completed. By morning, townspeople gathered along the docks, whispering. The ship did not move. No crew emerged. No signal was given. The harbor master took a small boat out with several men they called up to the deck. There was no reply, no footsteps, no creak of rope or timber. Only water slapping softly against wood. They climbed aboard and something felt wrong immediately. Not violent, not messy, emptied. Cabins stood open, beds untouched, meals half-prepared and left to rot. In one room, a clock continued ticking, each second painfully loud in the silence. It was as if everyone had simply evaporated. At the helm, they found the captain. He was bound upright, secured with thick rope wound again and again around his body and the wheel. His hands were fused to the wood, fingers bent at impossible angles, tendons locked in a final, desperate grip. His skin had gone waxy. His lips were drawn back slightly, teeth exposed, not in pain but in realization. His eyes remained open, not glassy, focused, as if even death could not make him look away from whatever stood before him in his final moments. Crushed into his palm was a crucifix, bent and damaged, as though it had been used not for prayer but as a weapon. Strapped to his wrist was a small journal, the leather darkened with sweat and seawater. The harbor master took it gently, his hands shaking, not from fear of the corpse, but from the certainty that the man had died watching something approach. The entries began calmly. Dates, coordinates, routine observations, then came the changes. Crewmen complained of movement below deck, footsteps when no one walked, shadows that didn't match the lantern light. Men disappeared, not violently, not loudly. One night they were there. The next morning their hammocks hung empty. The remaining crew refused to go below after sunset. They armed themselves with knives, with tools, with prayers. The captain wrote of eyes watching from the dark, of something that learned, of something that waited. By the final pages, the handwriting collapsed into frantic scratches. Only the captain remained. He wrote that it was no longer hiding, that it was patient, that it knew him now. And then the writing stopped. The ship was searched thoroughly. In the hold, stacked carefully like coffins, were 50 large wooden crates. Each one was filled with earth, dark soil, heavy, faintly scented with rot. There was nothing else. No gold, no weapons, no explanation. Each crate bore an address in London, paid in advance, prepared long before the journey began. Later, after the shock had dulled, stories surfaced. Dockworkers, fishermen, a child watching from a window, they all said the same thing. Just before the ship settled fully against the pier, before anyone boarded, something moved. A massive black shape crossed the deck. Low, fast, wrong. It leapt from ship to shore in a single motion, struck stone, and vanished into the streets. A dog or something pretending to be one. Its eyes burned red, aware. It ran uphill toward the old cemetery, toward the graves. They searched. They found nothing. The Demeter was labeled an oddity, a tragedy, a mystery. The crates were delivered quietly to London. The captain was buried with ceremony. The journal was locked away. Whitby returned to routine, but beneath the surface something had changed. The ship had not arrived empty. It had carried something ancient across continents, something that did not sleep, something that understood patience better than any human ever could. It crossed the sea inside a box of grave soil. Now it was loose. This was not an invasion. There were no banners, no battles, no announcement, only silence, only shadows, only a single presence slipping into a new land unseen. This is how the most infamous creature in literary history entered the modern world, not as myth, not as fantasy, but as inevitability. From this moment forward, England would never be alone again. Neither will we. Total darkness. A sound like breath, but too slow, too deep, as if the darkness itself is inhaling. Some stories do not begin with monsters. They begin with invitations. We follow a man who believed himself rational into a structure designed to unmake reason. We stand on stone floors soaked in centuries of suffering. We ride toward a destination that was never truly a place. We witness something prehistoric slipping into a world that believed itself enlightened. This is not a tale shaped by campfires or softened by repetition. It was written in ink and obsession at the end of the 19th century by a man who studied fear like a science and patience like a weapon. But before the author, before the audience, before the scream, there was the creature. And before the creature revealed itself, there was a door. His name was Jonathan Harker. He was young enough to believe the world was stable, educated enough to trust documents more than instincts, sheltered enough to believe evil announced itself loudly. He lived by structure, appointments, schedules, ambition measured and contained. He was engaged, in love, rooted. The future stretched ahead of him like a well-lit road, and roads, Jonathan believed, were meant to be followed. He worked for a respectable legal firm, one that survived by defining ownership, boundaries, and rules. Order was its currency. His fiancée, Mina, was not fragile. She was observant, disciplined, thoughtful. She believed in progress, education, and clarity. They spoke of children, of careers, of permanence. Jonathan assumed these were guarantees. That assumption was his first mistake. The request arrived without warning. A foreign aristocrat, old money, older land. An accent heavy with unfamiliar consonants. He wished to purchase property in England, not one home but several, scattered and carefully chosen. The legalities were dense, the documents ancient, the client demanding. And the demand that mattered most was the strangest of all. He would not travel to England. England would come to him. The paperwork must be completed in his residence, in his fortress, in his castle. Jonathan accepted without hesitation. He mistook selection for privilege. He believed he had been chosen because he was capable. In truth, he had been chosen because he was available. because he was insignificant enough to be absent without consequence, because he was curious, because he would say yes. Jonathan told himself the journey would be enriching, that unfamiliar landscapes were merely scenic, that foreign customs were inconveniences, nothing more. He did not understand that the further east he traveled, the more the world itself would begin to decay. Villages grew quieter. Faces turned away. Prayers were whispered when he spoke his destination aloud. He laughed at it. Superstition, he thought. Ignorance. He did not know the castle had been waiting, that its gates had opened for others before him, that it fed on guests, that it remembered names. He did not know that contracts were meaningless there, that once inside the only law was hunger, and the creature that lived within those walls did not intend to let him leave whole. Jonathan Harker believed he was traveling to conclude a transaction. What he was truly doing was offering his hand to something that had not felt warmth in centuries. And once that hand was taken, there would be no pulling away. A heartbeat sounds in the dark, slow, distant, not human. Some names do not introduce a person. They announce a presence. The client was known as Count Dracula. Jonathan Harker read the name as he would any other, briefly and professionally, without superstition. It appeared old, formal, almost theatrical. He did not notice how long his eyes lingered on it. He did not realize that once the name entered his thoughts, it never truly left. Jonathan packed lightly, practical clothes, documents bound with string, his journal new and unmarked, waiting to be filled. At the station, he kissed Mina goodbye, promised letters, promised punctuality, promised safety. She smiled, unaware that this was the last moment her life would ever feel intact. The train doors closed, metal screamed against metal. The distance between Jonathan and everything familiar began to widen. Jonathan wrote obsessively, landscapes, schedules, conversations. At first, the entries were confident, almost smug, cataloging efficiency and comfort and civilization. But slowly the journal changed. The language grew cautious. The margins filled with questions. The journal was no longer a diary. It became a witness. The early stretch of the journey felt triumphant. Paris glowed beneath glass and gaslight. Munich pulsed with commerce. Vienna shimmered with certainty. These were cities where night had been domesticated, driven back by bulbs and timetables. Jonathan trusted these places. They made sense. Then the train continued. Beyond the reach of modernity, the rails grew unreliable, schedules dissolved, conductors answered questions with shrugs, stations darkened, platforms emptied. Conversations softened whenever Jonathan spoke his destination. He noticed hands forming protective gestures, signs meant to ward off something unseen. He felt the geography shift, not only in miles, but in centuries. Forests pressed closer to the tracks. Villages appeared hunched and aged, built for endurance rather than beauty. The land felt aware, as though it had watched travelers like Jonathan pass through before and remembered how they ended. The town of Bistritz felt like the end of breath. This was where the train stopped pretending. The inn crouched against the cold, its walls drawn tight as if bracing for violence. When Jonathan presented his letter, the room reacted as one. Conversation collapsed into silence. Faces stiffened. The innkeeper's wife whispered a prayer under her breath, fingers trembling as she traced signs meant to repel what could not be named. Jonathan did not understand the words, but fear required no translation. She begged him not to go. Quietly, without hysteria, like someone pleading with a man already slipping beneath the surface of dark water, she spoke of the mountains, of the castle, of a master who did not age. Jonathan tried to reassure her. He spoke of contracts, of law, of reason. She looked at him with unbearable sorrow, the kind reserved for funerals. Without ceremony, she removed a silver cross from her neck. It had been worn smooth by decades of terror. She pressed it into Jonathan's palm and closed his fingers around it tightly, as though forcing him to hold on to life itself. Please. That single word carried more weight than any warning. Jonathan pocketed the cross, not from belief, but courtesy. He did not know courtesy would be the last luxury he would be given. Sleep came reluctantly. When it arrived, it betrayed him. Dreams flooded in without invitation. A gaze without eyes, a hunger without form, a voice that did not speak but claimed. Jonathan woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering, certain he had been watched. The room was empty. Yet the sensation lingered as though something had leaned close to him and withdrawn only because morning was near. At dawn, Jonathan rose unsettled. He could not explain the pressure pressing against his thoughts. He blamed travel, fatigue, nerves. He did not yet understand the truth. The dreams were not imagination. They were anticipation, and the mountains were no longer distant. They were calling. A soundless wind moved across stone. It was not felt, not heard, only known. There comes a moment in every nightmare when the road behind you disappears, not gradually, instantly. From that moment on, the journey belongs to something else. At first light, Jonathan climbed into a mountain coach crowded with strangers who refused to meet his eyes. Their faces were tight, carved by worry, as though each mile forward demanded a price. The route was simple in description, but not in meaning. Upward, higher, toward a mountain corridor feared even by those who lived near it. The destination was the Borgo Pass, a crossing spoken of in whispers rather than sentences, a place where roads thinned and certainty dissolved. At midnight, Jonathan was to be collected, not rescued, collected. As the coach climbed, the land began to warp. Mountains rose abruptly, jagged and merciless, their peaks cutting into the clouds like blades. Forests thickened until daylight struggled to reach the ground, branches interlocking overhead like ribs. Villages flickered into view, ancient and hunched, built for defense rather than comfort. Their buildings leaned inward, as though afraid to stand apart. Jonathan noticed the symbols. They were not subtle, not decorative, crosses embedded in stone, charms nailed into wood, carved icons rotting on trees. These were not expressions of faith, they were barricades. The other passengers watched Jonathan the way one watches a condemned man who does not yet know his sentence. An old man murmured protective phrases under his breath whenever the carriage jolted. Another formed strange shapes with his fingers, symbols meant to repel unseen forces. A woman abruptly leaned across the bench and forced something into Jonathan's grasp. A bundle, pungent, wrapped tightly, garlic. Her eyes were wild, not mad, but aware. Jonathan felt embarrassment rise, then unease. He kept the charm. Not from belief, from instinct. With each mile, something was stripped away. Familiar sounds vanished, the air sharpened. Even his thoughts felt thinner. This was no longer travel. It was retreat backward through centuries, beyond reason, past the safety of explanation. Jonathan sensed it then. The modern world was no longer following him. The coach stopped at midnight. Exactly. The precision felt deliberate, ritualistic. Moonlight spilled across snow, turning the mountains into pale, skeletal giants looming in every direction. The road narrowed into insignificance, swallowed by stone and shadow. Jonathan stepped down. The air bit immediately, then he saw it. A second carriage stood apart from the road, angled as though it had been waiting long before anyone arrived. It was old-fashioned, crafted with elegance that suggested wealth without warmth. Its surface swallowed light. 4 horses were harnessed to it. They did not move, not a breath, not a twitch, not a sound. They resembled statues carved in the likeness of beasts that once lived. Wrongness settled deep into Jonathan's bones. These were not animals. They were instruments. The driver sat unmoving, a towering shape wrapped in layers of dark cloth. His face remained hidden, features devoured by shadow beneath the brim of his hat. Jonathan searched for signs of life, a breath, a shift. There was none. The driver raised one arm. The gesture held no emotion. It assumed obedience. Jonathan turned back. The mountain coach had already begun to pull away. The passengers did not wave. One woman openly sobbed, clutching her coat as though bracing against grief. Jonathan attempted a smile. It trembled. His body moved before his mind could protest. He stepped into the waiting carriage. The door closed behind him. The sound echoed too long. Without signal or command, the horses surged forward. The carriage flew across terrain that should have destroyed it. Sharp turns, loose stone, sheer drops yawning inches from the wheels. Jonathan braced himself, certain death was moments away. It never came. The driver never hesitated. He guided the carriage as though the darkness parted willingly before him. Jonathan dared a glance upward. Moonlight brushed the driver's face just enough. 2 points of color burned back at him. Red, alive, hungry, time disintegrated. Then an archway emerged from the rock itself, colossal and ancient, weathered yet intentional. The carriage passed beneath it, and something changed. The air thickened. The night deepened. Jonathan felt an unmistakable certainty settle over him. He had crossed into a place where the rules of the outside world no longer applied. The fortress rose from the mountainside like a scar left by history, walls thicker than memory, towers twisted skyward like grasping fingers, windows dark, unlit, observant. This was not architecture. It was assertion, a declaration of permanence. All curdled into fear because deep down, beyond logic, beyond denial, Jonathan understood the truth. This place did not repel intruders. It consumed them. And the gates had opened, just for him. A torch hissed as if struggling to remain alive, its flame bending against an unseen pressure in the air. There are places where doors are not barriers, they are promises. And once fulfilled, they are never opened again. The carriage stopped, not with the relief of rest, but with the certainty of arrival. The door swung outward on silent hinges. Beyond it stood a solitary figure, rigid and elongated, wrapped in black cloth that swallowed the firelight rather than reflecting it. Stone walls rose behind him, ancient and damp, pressing inward as though eager to seal what had just been delivered. A single torch burned nearby, its glow unstable, painting the figure in restless shadow. Then the voice came. Low, controlled, cultivated, welcome to my dwelling. The words were not a greeting, they were a statement of fact. Enter without fear and by your own consent. Jonathan hesitated, only for a fraction of a second. Then he stepped down. Up close, the man was unsettling in ways Jonathan could not immediately name. He was tall, taller than expected, and unnaturally narrow, like a silhouette stretched beyond proper proportion. His clothing belonged to another era, dark fabrics cut with severe precision, immaculate in a way that suggested obsession rather than care. Nothing about him appeared worn. Nothing about him appeared warm. His face was sharply sculpted, angles catching the torchlight without softening. His skin was pale, not sickly, but drained, as though color had been leached away over time. His hair was thick and dark, streaked with silver that suggested endurance rather than age. Then there were the eyes. They fixed on Jonathan with piercing clarity, not curious, assessing. Eyes that had observed human behavior long enough to anticipate it. When the man smiled, it was subtle and deeply wrong. His teeth gleamed, too pristine, too precise, like instruments rather than features. The Count extended his hand. I am Dracula, he said, inclining his head slightly. You are expected. Not welcomed, expected. Jonathan accepted the handshake. Revulsion surged instantly. The flesh was rigid, lifelessly cold, not chilled by mountain air, but utterly devoid of warmth. The grip tightened, harder than politeness required, harder than courtesy allowed. Jonathan felt pressure without pain, strength unchecked by limitation, like metal wrapped in skin. He withdrew his hand as smoothly as he could. Dracula watched him closely. A smile flickered, satisfied. Jonathan lifted his belongings and crossed the threshold. The stone beneath his feet was colder than the night outside. The air within the castle was still, thick and unmoving, as though untouched by breath. Behind him the door closed, not violently, not abruptly, but with a sound so heavy and final it reverberated through Jonathan's chest rather than his ears. Something inside him recoiled, an instinct he did not yet trust. The days that followed blurred into disorientation. Count Dracula performed the role of host flawlessly, attentive without warmth, courteous without kindness, engaging without familiarity. Meals were lavish, though Jonathan never saw them prepared. Dishes appeared steaming, untouched by human presence. The Count never ate. He only watched. They spent long hours in a grand chamber lined with books older than the nation Jonathan came from. Maps lay unfurled across tables of blackened wood. Dracula questioned him relentlessly. About England, about property laws, about how people moved through cities, where they gathered, when they gathered, how closely they pressed together. He spoke of crowds as though they were resources. Jonathan answered. He told himself it was professional, that nothing about this was unusual. Unease crept in anyway. There was something else. Jonathan never encountered another living soul. No servants, no guards, no staff, yet rooms were cleaned. Candles replaced, beds made, meals served. The castle functioned flawlessly as though it required no hands, no sleep, no life. When Jonathan asked, Dracula dismissed the questions with smooth vagueness. I prefer solitude. Jonathan began to understand. Solitude here was enforced. Another detail gnawed at him. Dracula never appeared during the day, never once. He excused himself politely before dawn and did not return until nightfall. Jonathan explored the castle alone beneath the sun. Corridors twisted endlessly. Doors were locked without visible mechanism. Windows were sealed shut, thick glass sunk deep into stone, admitting light while denying air. The silence pressed in, not empty, expectant. One evening, Jonathan stood in his room, shaving by candlelight. The mirror, small and ordinary, anchored him to routine. Steel met skin, then he felt it. A presence behind him, so close he could feel cold radiating outward. Dracula leaned in, examining the razor with interest. Jonathan's eyes flicked to the mirror. He saw himself clearly, the candle, the room, but the Count was absent, not blurred, not distorted. Gone, Jonathan froze, the blade slipped. Pain bloomed. Blood welled. A single red drop fell. Dracula inhaled sharply, a sound like hunger restrained by force. Jonathan spun around. The Count stood there fully now, expression unreadable. The mirror vanished, snatched away, shattered against the wall. Dracula's voice hardened. You should not use such things here. Jonathan understood then, not completely, but enough. This was not hospitality, it was containment, and he was no longer a guest, he was inventory. A faint drip echoed in the dark, water striking stone. Again. There comes a point where the mind stops protecting itself, where denial collapses, where truth steps forward naked and unbearable. Jonathan raised his eyes instinctively, ready to speak, to gesture politely, to preserve the fragile illusion that this was still a civil exchange. The mirror answered first. His reflection stared back at him, pale skin, strained eyes, a razor frozen mid-movement. The candle trembled. The window frame loomed behind him. But the space where his host stood was empty. No shadow, no distortion, no suggestion of presence, just air. Jonathan's breath caught painfully in his throat. His body reacted before thought could intervene. He spun around. The Count stood behind him. Close, too close, solid, undeniably real. The contradiction tore through Jonathan's reason like a blade. For a heartbeat, the world fractured. Dracula noticed instantly. The fear on Jonathan's face was no longer concealed. It had surfaced, raw and unmistakable. The Count's gaze sharpened, not with surprise, but with recognition. Then his eyes dropped to the mirror. What followed was not human. The Count's features twisted violently, as though something ancient and furious surged to the surface. The calm aristocratic mask shattered, revealing naked hostility beneath. Jonathan stepped backward, his pulse roaring in his ears. The Count's voice emerged low and controlled, threaded with threat. You should take greater care when you spill your blood. Some dangers here are drawn to it. The words were not advice. They were revelation. Before Jonathan could respond, Dracula lunged. The mirror was ripped from the wall and hurled outward with impossible force. Glass exploded into the night. The sound rang through the courtyard below, sharp and violent and final. Then nothing. The Count straightened, his expression smoothed. The fury vanished as if it had never existed. He wished Jonathan a good night and left. Jonathan remained where he stood. His heart hammered. His hands shook violently. What had just occurred? Why did the Count leave no reflection? Why did glass provoke such rage? And most terrifying of all, why had Jonathan known, even before seeing it, that the mirror would reveal nothing? Night fell. Jonathan attempted to leave his chamber, not to escape. Not yet, just to walk. Just to breathe air not trapped in stone. He turned the handle. It did not move. The lock held firm from the outside. The realization settled slowly, sinking deeper with each breath. This was not an error, this was design. Jonathan Harker was confined. From that night onward, everything shifted. The work continued, but its tone did not. Dracula still spoke politely, still asked questions, still maintained civility, but something predatory crept into his gaze. Jonathan felt it constantly, a pressure, a weight. The Count's eyes lingered too long. Too often on Jonathan's throat, on the rhythm pulsing beneath his skin. The hunger was no longer fully hidden. It watched, waited, measured. When daylight came, the Count vanished as always. Jonathan explored with growing desperation. Corridors twisted unpredictably. Rooms repeated themselves. Staircases led nowhere. Every exit was denied, doors locked. Windows unreachable. The castle was not confusing by accident. It was constructed to disorient, to exhaust, to erode resolve. Jonathan understood then. This place did not expect prisoners to escape. Driven by terror, Jonathan searched deeper. He found a door unlike the others. Heavier, older, it yielded. A staircase descended in tight spirals, each step colder than the last. The air changed immediately. Damp, earthy, ancient. The stone here was different, rougher, darker, older than the fortress above. This place had existed long before the castle had risen around it. The staircase ended in a vast chamber, once holy. Now ruined. A chapel lay desecrated, its sacred purpose erased beneath grime, rot, and neglect. The smell was overwhelming. Soil, decay, death. Jonathan's stomach clenched. Then he saw them, crates, dozens of them, arranged with ritualistic precision, each one packed with heavy, dark earth, fresh, recently disturbed, grave soil. Jonathan staggered forward, dread crushing his chest. These were not cargo, they were sanctuaries, resting places. The realization struck like a physical blow. This castle was not merely inhabited, it was sustained. Jonathan's hands shook violently as he approached one box. He reached out and touched the wood. It was cold, and something beneath it felt expectant. Jonathan Harker stood alone beneath the castle, surrounded by proof of something that did not die, something that fed, something that planned, and for the first time the full truth surfaced. He was not meant to leave, he was meant to be used. A low rumble moved beneath the stone, as though the castle itself had begun to stir. There are discoveries that change a man, and then there are discoveries that erase him. Jonathan's hand hovered above the crate. His fingers trembled violently, not from cold, but from an instinct older than reason screaming for him to turn away. He looked anyway. The earth inside was packed tight, dark and wet, smelling of decay and something metallic. And within it lay a body, perfectly still, perfectly arranged. Count Dracula was embedded in the soil as though it had grown around him. His eyes were open but vacant, fixed on nothing. His mouth was parted slightly, lips swollen and vividly stained, glistening with fresh blood. Not dried, not old, recent. His face, once severe and hollow, now appeared fuller, disturbingly healthy, as if vitality itself had been poured back into him. Jonathan's knees buckled. This was not sleep. This was not illness. This was rest. The understanding struck with such force it stole Jonathan's breath. This thing did not live. It endured, it fed. It returned to the earth like a parasite retreating into soil after feeding. No reflection, no warmth, no soul. The Count was not cursed. He was perfected, a predator refined by centuries, a corpse that had learned how to walk. Jonathan clamped a hand over his mouth to keep from screaming because the truth was unbearable and because screaming would summon him. Jonathan ran, not carefully, not quietly. He fled like prey that had finally seen the teeth. He tore up the stone steps, lungs burning, vision blurring, heart battering against his ribs as though trying to escape his chest. Thoughts shattered into fragments. London, crowds, streets full of breathing people, children, markets, trains. The Count was not hiding in England, he was migrating, and Jonathan was trapped inside the launch point. He slammed doors, pulled handles, beat his fists against stone until pain bloomed white-hot through his arms. Nothing yielded. The castle remained unmoved, indifferent, hungry. That night Jonathan did not hear the Count arrive. He felt him. The air cooled sharply. The silence thickened. Dracula stood in the doorway, composed and immaculate, already dressed for departure. "I leave tonight," he said calmly. "England awaits me. Jonathan would remain. Forever." The word closed around Jonathan like a coffin lid. Then the Count smiled, thin and knowing. "You may write," he said gently. "Tell those dear to you that you are content, that you have chosen to stay." The meaning was unmistakable. Obey or become food. Jonathan nodded because survival demanded it. He wrote the letters slowly, painfully. Each sentence was a betrayal. Each word tasted like ash. He told Mina he was safe. That business delayed him, that she should not worry. Ink blurred as tears fell unnoticed onto the page. He sealed the envelopes knowing, deep inside, that these were not letters. They were farewells disguised as hope. When the Count departed, the castle did not sleep. Jonathan sat in darkness, shaking, listening to the stone walls whisper as they settled under their own age. He realized something then. Waiting was death. Silence was surrender. If he was to die here, it would be on his own terms. Jonathan opened the window. Cold wind tore into the room. Below him yawned a vertical plunge into oblivion. The wall was ancient, pitted and cracked, eroded by centuries of weather and blood. Jonathan climbed out. Stone tore skin from his fingers, muscles burned. Breath came in ragged gasps. He clung to the wall like a spider suspended hundreds of feet above jagged rock. He did not look down. He focused only on the next handhold, on survival, on defiance. He reached a lower window and collapsed inside. This part of the castle felt different, older, heavier, as though it remembered things the upper halls tried to forget. Jonathan stumbled through corridors that smelled of dust, rot, and something coppery until he found the room. The Count's private chamber was not ornate. It was functional. Papers lay strewn across a desk. Shipping records, routes, schedules, addresses. Jonathan read them with growing horror. Boxes of earth, multiple destinations, multiple safe houses. London was not a destination. It was a feeding ground. This was not a single monster story. This was an outbreak, and Jonathan, alone, bleeding, exhausted, was the only witness. He sank to his knees as the truth pressed down with unbearable weight. He was not meant to escape. He was meant to understand, to see the scope, to know what was coming, and then to die forgotten. The castle groaned. Somewhere above, stones shifted, something moved. The night was not over, and the Count was not far. A low wind moved through the stone corridors, carrying laughter with it. There are horrors meant to end lives, and then there are horrors meant to end eras. Jonathan stared at the documents until the words blurred together. 50 crates, not hidden, not improvised, distributed. Each one marked for delivery across London, scattered deliberately like seeds planted in fertile ground. The realization landed with suffocating clarity. These were not hiding places, they were stations. Sanctuaries buried inside a city that slept peacefully, unaware it was being mapped for slaughter. The creature was not relocating, it was expanding. London was not a destination, it was a feeding ground, dense, endless, ignorant. Millions of heartbeats, a harvest that could last lifetimes. Jonathan's stomach twisted. This was not survival, this was conquest. Footsteps echoed through the corridor, heavy, measured, unhurried, the sound of something that knew escape was impossible. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. The Count was returning. Panic surged sharp and overwhelming. Jonathan ran. He tore through a doorway, shouldering it open, plunging into a passage he had never seen before. The walls narrowed. The ceiling dropped. The air choked with age. Behind him came a voice, smooth, almost disappointed. "Mr. Harker," it called gently, "you wound me. I had hoped for something more loyal." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. The certainty behind them was enough. Jonathan ran faster. He reached a narrow opening, too small, impossibly tight. He did not hesitate. He forced himself through. Stone tore at his skin. Fabric ripped. Blood streaked the wall. Pain was irrelevant. He spilled onto a thin ledge clinging to the castle's exterior. Wind roared around him. Below was nothing. A void. Then movement. Jonathan looked down, and his breath left him entirely. Count Dracula was descending the castle wall. Not climbing, not slipping, moving head first. Body flush against the stone, limbs unfolding with horrifying precision. He crawled like an insect, silent and effortless, his cloak rippling behind him like a living shadow, his face tilted upward, smiling. "You cannot flee," the Count called calmly. "This place belongs to me, and so do you." Jonathan's body shook violently. There was no escape downward, no safety above. The castle itself had become the monster's body. Jonathan understood then. There were only three endings: return to his cell, face the creature, or fall. He chose the only one that denied the Count control. Jonathan leapt. The wind screamed past him. Stone rushed upward. He struck a lower roof hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Agony exploded through his body. For a terrifying moment he could not breathe. Then air returned. Pain followed. He was alive. He rolled and slid across slanted tiles until he found a broken opening. He threw himself inside. The old chapel, the crates, the stench of graves. Jonathan did not stop. He burst through another door and ran, out, into the forest. Behind him the castle echoed with laughter, low, wild, triumphant. It followed him into the trees like a hunting call. Jonathan ran blindly through the Transylvanian forest, branches clawing at him, roots snaring his feet, lungs burning as darkness swallowed him whole. He did not know where he was going, only that stopping meant death. Only that survival meant warning the world. Because even as Jonathan fled, the monster no longer needed him. The plan was already in motion. Across the sea, a ship cut through black water, silent, patient. Its cargo did not breathe, did not move, did not dream. Hidden inside stolen grave earth, something ancient waited. Hungry. In England, two young women walked along seaside cliffs. They laughed. They spoke of ordinary futures. They watched ships enter the harbor of Whitby with idle curiosity. They did not feel the eyes upon them. They did not sense the shadow approaching. They did not know death was already crossing the ocean. To understand what would happen aboard the doomed vessel, one truth must be faced. This creature was not savage. It was not impulsive. It was deliberate. Across centuries, it had learned that survival demanded patience, intelligence, adaptation. Transylvania had grown dangerous. The old knowledge lingered there. People remembered how to fight back. England did not. England trusted reason, mocked superstition, dismissed ancient warnings, and London was perfection. Millions pressed together, endless anonymity, a city that would not believe until the streets themselves ran dry. The Count did not seek chaos. He sought permanence, and the modern world had invited him in. The ship sailed on, the city slept, and the age of reason was about to meet something far older. Waves struck the hull in a steady rhythm, patient, unstoppable. Predators do not survive for centuries by chance. They survive by planning. London was perfect, not because it was grand, not because it was powerful, but because it was crowded. A city swollen with bodies, noise, and motion, so vast that loss dissolved into statistics. People vanished every day. Workers, children, the poor, the forgotten. A few missing faces barely registered. A few drained bodies would be blamed on disease, violence, poverty. Dracula understood this. He did not seek chaos. He sought camouflage. Here he could feed for generations without ever exhausting the supply. The move to England was not sudden. It was not reckless. For months, perhaps years, the Count prepared. He read obsessively, books on British law, treatises on property ownership, maps detailing streets, railways, ports. He studied the rhythms of the city, when people slept, when they gathered, when they were most vulnerable. He learned the language until it no longer betrayed him. His voice became polished, precise, touched only by a faint aristocratic inflection that suggested wealth, not danger. He did not adapt to England. He studied it. Dracula never worked alone. He never needed to. Through letters and discreet transactions, he employed intermediaries, ordinary men who believed they were serving a reclusive foreign noble. They purchased properties across the city, not one residence, many, scattered deliberately, forming a hidden network embedded inside London's bones. None of them knew who their employer truly was. None ever saw his face. They were paid well. They asked no questions. The boxes were not cargo. They were lifelines. Dracula was bound to the land that birthed him, earth steeped in centuries of death, saturated with ritual, violence, and decay. Without it, he weakened. Without it, he would eventually perish. So the soil was taken from places corrupted beyond redemption, from beneath the chapel, from graves that had never known peace, from ground that remembered him. Each crate was an anchor, a fragment of his homeland transplanted into foreign streets. 50 chances to survive the sun, 50 sanctuaries, only the crossing remained. Dracula chose the sea, anonymous, unquestioned, routine. He would remain concealed during daylight, sealed inside his traveling coffin. At night, he would rise quietly to oversee the voyage, ensuring obedience through fear or fascination. By the time the ship reached England, there would be no witnesses left to speak. When he stepped onto English soil, he would be unseen. Unremarkable, just another arrival in a city overflowing with them. It was flawless, almost. The vessel was called the Demeter, a Russian cargo schooner, modest in size but built to endure rough waters and long routes. Its crew numbered 7, a captain hardened by decades at sea, a first mate with a superstitious streak, 5 sailors who trusted wood, rope, and routine. They feared storms, they feared reefs, they did not fear legends. The Demeter left the port of Varna on July 6th. The manifest listed 50 crates. Contents: industrial material, silver sand, mold, dirt, nothing remarkable. The cargo was stowed below deck, lashed carefully into place. The client never appeared. All arrangements had been handled through correspondence. Money arrived promptly, generously, enough to silence doubt. Only the first mate hesitated. The crates were far heavier than expected, too heavy for soil, and there was a smell, subtle, unpleasant, like damp stone, like old crypts, like something long buried that had been disturbed. The captain dismissed his concerns. They had a schedule, a route, a payment. The sea waited. The Demeter slipped from port into open water. The coast receded. The horizon swallowed the land. Below deck, 50 boxes sat in darkness. Inside one of them, something waited, unmoving, aware, patient. The crew went about their duties unaware that the voyage had already been claimed, that every night would take one of them, that the sea would carry not just cargo, but silence, that by the time England came into view, no living soul would remain to tell the story, and the monster would walk ashore alone. The timbers creaked softly. Water lapped against the hull in a steady rhythm. Ordinary sounds, reassuring sounds. Every disaster begins the same way, with people convinced nothing is wrong. The captain brushed aside the first mate's unease without hesitation. Cargo was cargo, paid cargo. That was all that mattered. The sky was clear, the water cooperative, the ship obedient. The crew laughed, shared tobacco, spoke of wages spent and warm beds waiting back home. This was meant to be simple. 2 weeks, perhaps less if the wind was generous. Another crossing, another paycheck. For a time, the sea played along. The Demeter slid westward, hugging familiar routes, slipping through the Bosphorus like a well-trained animal. The Black Sea fell away behind them, replaced by calmer waters beneath open skies. The men worked their shifts. They ate together. They slept soundly. Nothing broke, nothing failed, nothing warned them, but the ship was already compromised. The change came quietly. It always does. On the 4th night, the watch fell to a young sailor named Petrovsky. He was steady, alert, not prone to nerves. The kind of man captains trusted in darkness. The deck was still, the stars sharp, the sea breathed softly below. Then a sound came from beneath the boards, faint at first. A dragging scrape, wood against wood. Petrovsky paused, listening. Ships made noises. They settled. They shifted. He told himself that. Then it came again, slower, deliberate, as if something heavy were being pulled across the floorboards below. He called out. No answer. The silence that followed felt intentional. Against instinct, Petrovsky took a lantern and went below. The ladder creaked beneath his boots as he descended into the hold. Lantern light shuddered across stacked crates, stretching shadows into grotesque shapes that clung to the walls. "Anyone there?" he called. Nothing replied. He moved deeper, checking ropes, touching boxes. Everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing had shifted. Nothing explained the sound. Then the flame died, not flickered, not sputtered, extinguished, instantly, as though pinched between unseen fingers. Petrovsky stood frozen in absolute blackness. Then he heard breathing, not rushed, not panicked, measured, close, not his own. Terror detonated in his chest. He spun blindly, arms flailing, lantern useless, vision gone. He slammed into crates, scraped skin raw against wood. The breathing followed, unhurried, certain. He found the ladder by touch and scrambled upward, heart hammering, lungs screaming. He burst onto the deck gasping, drenched in sweat, eyes wild. The others gathered, irritated more than concerned. Petrovsky tried to speak. Words collided, something below, something watching, something alive. They laughed, clapped him on the back, blamed rum, blamed nerves, blamed darkness. The captain dismissed him with a scowl. Petrovsky said nothing more. He never went below deck again. Morning came. Petrovsky did not. His bunk was untouched, sheets cold, no sign of struggle, no blood, no body. The ship was searched thoroughly. Every corner, every rope, every rail, nothing. The sea was calm. The rails intact. No reason, no explanation. The captain raged, accused carelessness, drunkenness, a fall overboard, but none of it fit. Petrovsky was seasoned, careful, afraid of heights, and the sea had been gentle as glass. Still, there was no other answer, so they accepted it, because the alternative was unthinkable. Below their feet the cargo remained silent, 50 boxes, unmoved, unopened. Inside one of them something had fed, and the ship sailed on.
An endless horizon stretched in every direction. No land. No witnesses. No escape. At sea, there are only two explanations for disappearance. The water. Or something worse. A man does not simply vanish from the deck of a ship. Not without sound. Not without trace. Not without someone noticing. And yet that was exactly what had happened. The captain recorded it in the log with a steady hand that betrayed nothing of what churned beneath his ribs. July 11th. Seaman Petrovsky lost overboard during the night. Presumed drowned. Cause unknown. The ink dried. Reality was sealed. The crew gathered in silence. A prayer was spoken. A hat removed. The ritual words offered up to the ocean, an old lie sailors told themselves so they could keep moving forward. Men disappeared at sea. It happened. They repeated it aloud until it almost sounded true. Then they returned to work. But something fundamental had shifted. The laughter did not return. The demeanor felt different. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every shadow lingered too long. Every creak of timber sounded deliberate. Men glanced over their shoulders. Hands tightened on railings. No one volunteered to go below deck. The cargo hold became forbidden ground. A place avoided. A place listening. 3 days passed. Then it happened again. The sailor's name was Aldrin. He took the night watch. He never gave it back. By morning, his bunk lay empty. Cold. Untouched. No blood. No signs of struggle. No splash had been heard. Now the lie collapsed. This was not accident. This was not the sea. This was a pattern. Fear spread like rot. The men stopped saying his name. They stopped speaking at all unless necessary. Eyes turned toward the hatch leading below. Toward the cargo. The first mate finally spoke what all of them were thinking. There's something down there. His voice shook, not with superstition, but with certainty. Something in those boxes. The captain refused. These were sealed goods. Property of a paying client. Opening them would violate maritime law. Would invite ruin. Would invite consequences. What could soil do? He snapped. What could dirt possibly do to grown men? No one answered. Because no one believed him. That night, the sea claimed nothing. Something else did. Another sailor vanished. No cry. No warning. No trace. By morning, only 4 men remained. The captain. The first mate. 2 sailors. They did not go below. They slept in turns on deck, backs pressed together like animals cornered by fire. Sleep became impossible. Every sound was danger. Every breath felt borrowed. The first mate confronted the captain in full daylight. His eyes were sunken. His hands shook uncontrollably. "This thing is killing us," he said. "Not the sea. Not chance. That." He pointed below. "We don't reach England unless we face it." The captain looked older then. Smaller. Fear had eaten away at his certainty. Finally, he nodded. They went together. Weapons in hand. Lanterns raised. 4 men against the unknown. The cargo hold greeted them with silence. The crates stood exactly as before. Meat. Ordered. Innocent. The first mate pried open the nearest lid. Wood cracked. The smell rose immediately. Soil. Damp. Rotting earth. Nothing else. Another box. The same. Another. Still the same. The captain exhaled sharply. "This is madness," he muttered. "We're chasing shadows." The first mate did not respond. He had moved farther back. Toward the far wall. Toward the shadows. He stopped. One of the boxes was not sealed. The lid sat ajar. As though something inside had been disturbed. Or had left. The lantern light wavered. The men stepped closer. And the hold felt suddenly smaller. As if the ship itself had leaned in to watch. The lantern flame trembled. Not from wind. From fear. There are things buried for a reason. And when they are uncovered, they do not forgive. The lid was wrong. It had not been sealed properly. Or perhaps it had been opened from within. The first mate approached with agonizing slowness, every step deliberate, every breath shallow. His lantern shook violently, throwing warped shadows across the walls as if the darkness itself were recoiling. He reached the crate. Paused. Then lifted the lid fully. Inside lay a figure. A man. Or what had once been one. He was stretched within the earth as though placed there with reverence, hands folded neatly across his chest, body motionless, perfectly arranged. His clothing was archaic, black fabric cut in a style long abandoned by the living, elegant and severe. His face was pale, deathly pale, yet untouched by decay. He did not look dead. He looked dormant. Waiting. The first mate's hand trembled uncontrollably as he reached forward. His fingers brushed the figure's cheek. Cold. Not chilled. Not lifeless. Cold like stone left beneath a mountain for centuries. Then the eyes opened. They burned red, luminous, alive with a hunger that obliterated every lie the men had clung to. The mouth opened. Teeth emerged, long and narrow, sharpened to points meant for tearing flesh. A sound followed. A hiss. Wet. Serpentine. A voice no human throat should have been able to form. The first mate screamed. He stumbled backward, colliding with crates, dropping the lantern. It shattered. The flame died instantly. The hold was swallowed by absolute blackness. And something moved. The men fled. They tore up the stairs in blind panic, tripping over one another, lungs burning, hearts slamming against their ribs. They did not stop until they burst onto the deck, collapsing into sunlight like survivors clawing their way out of a grave. "What was it?" one sailor sobbed. "What did you see?" The first mate could not answer. He only shook his head. Tears streamed down his face. His eyes had seen something they could never unsee. That night, the first mate vanished. No scream. No struggle. No trace. By morning, only 3 men remained. The captain, and 2 sailors who now understood the truth. They refused to die this way. They begged the captain. Pleaded. Argued. They would take the lifeboat. Row until their arms gave out. Starve if they had to. Anything was better than staying. The captain refused. "This is my ship," he said quietly. "I will not abandon her." There was no anger in his voice. No pride. Only resolve. That night, the sailors lowered the lifeboat in silence. The captain watched from the deck as it drifted away, swallowed by darkness. He knew he would never see them again. The sea is vast. And mercy is rare. Silence returned. Total. The captain stood alone on the Demeter. Alone with the sound of water. Alone with the weight of inevitability. Alone with the thing below deck. He retrieved a crucifix from his cabin, old and worn smooth by years of absent-minded touch. A gift from his wife, given long ago, meant more as sentiment than belief. Now he clutched it with white-knuckled desperation. He took rope from the ship's stores. Thick. Strong. He carried it to the helm. His hands did not shake as he bound himself to the wheel. Loop after loop. Knot after knot. If he was to die, he would die standing. If the monster claimed him, it would not stop the ship. England would be warned. Someone would see. Someone would understand. The captain stared forward into the dark horizon. The Demeter sailed on. Toward land? Toward revelation. Toward doom. Below deck something stirred. And the sea carried them both. The crucifix creaked under tightening fingers. Rope fibers groaned as they bit deeper into flesh. There are moments when defiance becomes sacred. And moments when it is merely delayed. The captain refused sleep. Sleep was surrender. He remained at the wheel night after night, spine locked upright, hands bound tight with rope that cut into his skin. Blood soaked the fibers, dark and tacky, unnoticed. One hand clenched the crucifix. The other gripped a knife grown slick with sweat. He stared into the dark, waiting. The creature came to him in fragments. Never fully revealed. A tall silhouette emerging just beyond the lantern's reach. Eyes burning red where no light should exist. A mouth curved into something that resembled amusement. It did not rush him. It did not strike. It observed. It studied the tremor in the captain's arms. Measured the slowing of his breath. Counted the hours as they peeled his strength away. Then it vanished, dissolving into shadow like breath into cold air. The captain understood. This was not a hunt. It was attrition. Rage flared through exhaustion. The captain screamed into the darkness, voice raw and cracking. Come then. Take me if you must, but you will not take this ship. The knight answered. The figure stepped fully into the lantern's glow. Count Dracula stood before him. Not monstrous. Not feral. Calm. Immaculate. His eyes regarded the captain with something unsettlingly close to admiration. You possess courage, Dracula said softly. For a mortal. The words were not mockery. They were assessment. But courage is not permanence. The captain thrust the crucifix forward. The reaction was immediate. Dracula recoiled, a hiss tearing from his throat. His skin blistered faintly where the symbol pressed against him, as though reality itself rejected his presence. Pain twisted the count's features. Real pain. The captain screamed again, this time in triumph. Begone. Dracula straightened slowly. Smiled. I can wait, he said gently. I have always waited. And with that, he withdrew. The captain prayed. Not eloquently. Not correctly. He prayed with broken words and bloodied hands to a god he had ignored his entire life. Night blurred into night. He stopped eating. Stopped drinking. Hunger and thirst faded into irrelevance. Only will remained. But will erodes. On the night of August 7th, land appeared. England. A faint smear of darkness against the horizon. The goal was in sight. And the captain's body finally betrayed him. His vision dimmed. His hands lost feeling. The crucifix slipped free and clattered against the deck, the sound echoing like a death knell. The count stepped forward for the last time. The sky answered. Thunder detonated over Whitby with bone-rattling force. Lightning tore the heavens open. Waves rose like living things, smashing themselves against the cliffs. The storm was not natural. It was escorted. Through the chaos, the Demeter came. Full sail. Impossible speed. Driven not by wind, but by will. It should have shattered. It should have sunk. Instead, it charged forward unyielding, guided by something unseen. The ship struck the rocks beneath the east cliff with a scream of tearing wood. Then stillness. The storm collapsed as abruptly as it had risen, as if dismissed. Dawn revealed a husk. The Demeter sat motionless in the harbor, sails shredded, ropes snapping in the breeze, deck deserted. No movement. No sound. The harbor master and several men rowed out cautiously. They called to the ship. Once. Twice. Nothing answered. Only silence. and the faint creak of a wheel that had been held until death itself loosened its grip. Something had arrived, and the sea had delivered it. Boots sounded against wet wood. Slow, careful, reluctant. Some horrors do not end when the screaming stops. They end when no one is listening anymore. They climbed aboard the Demeter one by one. The ship did not greet them. No footsteps echoed in return. No voices answered. No movement stirred. Only the smell of salt, old rope, and something faintly rotten beneath it all. The deck was bare. No crew. No signs of life. Only silence so complete it felt deliberate, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. They found the captain at the helm. He was bound upright, thick rope wrapped again and again around his body and the wheel. His hands were clenched so tightly that his fingers had stiffened around a crucifix, the metal pressed deep into his palms. His eyes were open, fixed, unblinking, staring straight ahead as though even death had not persuaded him to look away. His face was locked in terror so absolute it seemed carved rather than expressed. He had not died peacefully. He had endured. Inside his jacket, they found the journal. The harbor master opened it carefully, as though afraid it might crumble or scream. The pages told a story that unraveled the mind. Names crossed out. Dates scratched violently. Words repeated until they lost meaning. Men disappearing. Shadows moving. Something below deck. Something patient. Something hunting. The final entry was barely legible, the ink smeared by trembling hands. August 4th. It is here. I know it will return. I have bound myself to the wheel with my crucifix. I will not abandon my ship. If I must die, I will die at my post. God forgive me. There were no further entries. The authorities searched the vessel thoroughly. Every corridor. Every cabin. The hold. They found the cargo. 50 wooden crates. All intact. All sealed. Each one filled with nothing but dark soil. No contraband. No evidence. No explanation. The monster was gone. Still, stories spread. Dockworkers. Fishermen. Men who had watched the storm from shore. They swore they saw something move when the ship struck land. A shape. Large. Black. Too fast. They said it looked like a massive dog, its eyes glowing red like embers. They said it leapt from the deck onto the sand and ran straight toward the path climbing the cliff, toward the old cemetery. Searches found nothing. The captain was buried with honor. The Demeter was condemned and dismantled. The crates were claimed by a delivery company. Paperwork was checked. Addresses confirmed. London. Multiple locations. Everything lawful. Everything routine. The story made the papers. For a time. Then Whitby moved on. New stories arrived. New scandals. New tragedies. The ghost ship faded into anecdote, a curiosity, a tale told late at night and laughed away in daylight. And no one noticed the small changes. Dogs began to vanish. Sheep grazing near the cliffs were found dead, throats torn, blood drained into the soil. People blamed foxes. Disease. Bad luck. No one connected the dots. Because nothing obvious had happened. Because monsters were not real. Count Dracula was in England. Not announced. Not hunted. Not feared. He had 50 sanctuaries. A city swollen with millions of heartbeats. He moved unseen. Unremarkable. Free. And he was already feeding. High above the harbor, 2 young women walked beneath the fading sun. They did this every evening. The wind tangled their hair. The sea stretched endlessly below. They spoke of weddings. Of futures. Of lives that felt safely predictable. Their names were Lucy Westenra and Mina Murray. Best friends since childhood. Lucy was radiant, adored, newly engaged. Mina was thoughtful, observant, waiting for the man she loved to return from abroad. She did not know he was still alive. She did not know what he had seen. They passed through the old cemetery, smiling at crooked stones and half-erased names. Lucy slowed. She looked tired. "I'd been having the strangest dreams," she said lightly. "Red eyes. Watching me from the dark." Mina squeezed her arm. "You've been reading too many ghost stories." Lucy laughed. The wind sighed through the graves. And somewhere nearby, something listened. Wind moved through broken stone, carrying with it a low, funereal hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Some predators do not chase. They wait until the prey believes it is safe. Lucy and Mina walked toward the ruins of Whitby Abbey, their figures silhouetted against the sky bleeding slowly into night. The ancient stones loomed above them, jagged and skeletal, black against the dying light. The abbey had stood there for centuries, watching storms, burials, wars. Watching arrivals. Neither woman noticed the shape lingering at the edge of the shadows. Tall. Unmoving. Wrapped in darkness that clung to him rather than fell away. Eyes glimmered faintly, red. A smile curved beneath the night. Count Dracula had crossed an ocean for this moment. And now he had chosen. Lucy Westenra was 20 years old. She was adored. The kind of beauty that did not intimidate but invited, golden hair that caught sunlight effortlessly, eyes alive with warmth and curiosity, a laugh that softened rooms. People felt safer around her. She did not yet know that such light attracts things that cannot create it themselves. She did not yet know she was dying. Whitby was meant to be sanctuary. A quiet summer retreat by the sea, hosted by an elderly relative whose home overlooked the harbor. Salt air. Gentle walks. Long evenings by the fire. Lucy needed rest. London's social season had drained her. Dinners and dances and expectation piled endlessly upon her. Ahead waited marriage to Arthur Holmwood, heir to wealth and title, a man who loved her deeply. Everything was supposed to be beginning. For a few days it was. Lucy and Mina explored the town together. They climbed the long stone steps toward the cliff-top cemetery, and the ruined abbey above it, breathless and laughing. They sat among leaning headstones, watching the sea stretch endlessly below. Lucy spoke of her wedding. The house she and Arthur would share. The children she imagined. Mina listened, smiling, then spoke of Jonathan. Worry crept into her voice. His letters had grown strange. Disjointed. Unsettled. And then they had stopped. Mina told herself not to imagine reasons. Surely he was busy. Surely he would write soon. The sun would sink in colors too beautiful to last, amber and crimson and bruised violet, and they would descend the steps arm in arm, content, unafraid. Until the storm came. After the Demeter arrived, Lucy began to change. It began with sleep, or the absence of it. She tossed through the night, sheets tangled, breath shallow. She woke pale and drained, dark shadows bruising her eyes. Her dreams terrified her. "I was floating," she told Mina one morning, trying to laugh it away. "Not falling. Floating. And there was a voice calling me." Her hands trembled slightly. It sounded so sad. So lonely. It asked me to come closer? To open the window. Mina dismissed it gently. "Dreams mean nothing," she said. "You're overtired." Lucy nodded. But her eyes said otherwise. The dreams did not fade. They deepened. The voice returned night after night, gentle and mournful and irresistible. It did not command. It pleaded. Lucy began waking at dawn with the certainty that something had been taken from her, something she could not name. One night, Mina woke suddenly. The room felt wrong. Too quiet. She turned. Lucy's bed was empty. The sheets were cold. Panic surged. Mina searched the house, room after room. No Lucy. Then she saw it. The front door stood open, swaying slightly in the night air. Lucy had gone out. Alone. Barefoot. In her nightgown. Mina grabbed a shawl and ran into the street. Whitby lay silent beneath the stars. No footsteps. No voices. Only the distant rush of waves and the wind threading through narrow streets. Somewhere above, on the cliffs, near the graves, something waited. And Lucy was answering its call. A distant bell tolled once, then fell silent. There are places the night remembers. And once someone listens, the night answers. Mina ran. Her thoughts outpaced her legs, grasping desperately for certainty. Lucy loved the cemetery. She had said it was calm there, that it felt peaceful, that the dead seemed kinder than the living. The memory chilled Mina now. She climbed the long stone steps in agony, breath tearing at her lungs, calves screaming with every stride. Stone blurred beneath her feet. The wind sharpened as she ascended, carrying salt, earth, and something older. She reached the top. And froze. There, bathed in cold moonlight, sat Lucy on their bench overlooking the black, endless sea. But Lucy was not alone. A figure stood beside her. Tall. Unnaturally slender. Wrapped in darkness that swallowed light rather than reflected it. Its posture was intimate. Its head bent close to Lucy's throat. As if whispering. As if feeding. Mina's scream tore the night open. Lucy. The figure reacted instantly. Its head snapped up. For a single heartbeat, Mina saw its face. Skin pale as bone. Features sharp and cruelly elegant. Eyes burning red, alive with knowing hunger. Then it was gone. Not retreating. Not fleeing. Erased. Swallowed by shadow as though it had never existed. Mina ran to Lucy and dropped to her knees beside the bench. Lucy lay slumped, head lolling gently, breath shallow and uneven. Asleep. Or something dangerously close to it. Lucy, Mina whispered, shaking her. Lucy, wake up. Her friend stirred slowly, confusion clouding her eyes. Mina? Why are we here? You were walking in your sleep, Mina said, forcing calm into her voice. You came up here. Do you remember anything? Lucy frowned weakly. I was dreaming, she said softly. A voice called me. It sounded lonely. Then nothing. Mina's gaze dropped to Lucy's throat. 2 tiny wounds. Perfectly spaced. Red. Fresh. Too precise to be coincidence. Too deliberate to be natural. Cold terror settled into Mina's stomach, heavy and unmoving. She said nothing. What words existed for what she had seen? What truth could be spoken without sounding mad? Perhaps it had been moonlight. Exhaustion. Fears shaping shadows into monsters. She wrapped the shawl tightly around Lucy's shoulders, hiding the marks. Come on, she said gently. Let's get you back to bed. That night Mina locked every door. Secured every window. She dragged her bed against Lucy's door so even the slightest movement would wake her. But locks were meaningless now. What had been done could not be undone. Lucy declined rapidly. Color bled from her skin day by day. Her lips paled. Her eyes dulled. She slept constantly yet woke exhausted, gasping as though the air itself resisted her lungs. Sometimes she pressed a hand to her chest, confused. I feel so weak, she whispered. As if something is taking me away, little by little. Mina checked her throat every morning. The wounds remained. Never healing. Some mornings, after restless nights, they appeared darker. Wider. As though reopened. As though fed from again. Terrified, Mina wrote to Arthur Holmwood. She did not mention monsters. Only illness. Urgent concern. He came at once. When he met them at the station, the shock on his face said everything. Lucy was barely recognizable. The vibrant woman he loved had become a fragile echo of herself. Arthur took her to his family's estate and summoned the finest physicians money could buy. They examined her thoroughly. Blood, heart, lungs. Everything appeared normal. And yet she was dying. One doctor suggested nerves. Another proposed anemia. A third admitted defeat. No diagnosis. No treatment. No explanation. Lucy faded while science stood helpless. Arthur watched her waste away, terror carved into his face, love curdling into desperation. He would do anything. Call anyone. Believe anything. If it meant saving her. And somewhere in London, unseen and unchallenged, something ancient listened. And waited for night. A clock ticked in the silence. Too loud. Too slow. There comes a moment when disbelief becomes cruelty. When refusing to accept the impossible becomes a death sentence. Arthur Holmwood had already buried one woman he loved. His mother had wasted away the year before, bedridden and unreachable, taken by an illness no prayer could reverse. He had watched helplessly as she faded. He would not watch again. Lucy would not become another memory sealed in a coffin. Not if he could stop it. Arthur turned to his closest friend, Dr. John Seward. A man of science. Of order. Of medicine. Young but accomplished, director of a private asylum where broken minds were catalogued, examined, explained. Years earlier, Seward had loved Lucy himself. She had chosen Arthur. He had accepted it. He remained loyal, professional, concerned, and utterly baffled. Seward examined Lucy thoroughly. Her pulse was weak but steady. Her lungs were clear. Her organs showed no failure. And yet she was fading. Her symptoms did not resemble illness. They resembled extraction. As if something were taking her life without damaging her body. Seward remembered old lectures. Whispers. Footnotes professors never lingered on. Cases dismissed because they hovered at the edge of medicine and something far older. There was one man who might understand. A man Seward had not spoken of in years. The telegram was brief. Urgent. Desperate. Need your expertise immediately. Young woman dying of unknown cause. Please come at once. No explanation was needed. 2 days later, Professor Abraham Van Helsing arrived. Older. Sharper. Eyes that seemed to measure not just people, but the space around them. He spoke English fluently, though heavily accented, and laughed at strange moments, soft chuckles that unsettled those who heard them. He was a physician. A philosopher. A scholar of things modern medicine refused to acknowledge. He examined Lucy slowly. Deliberately. Then he asked questions no doctor should have needed to ask. Did she dream vividly? Yes. Had she been near old burial grounds, ruins, places of the dead? Yes. In Whitby. And here, he said softly, on her throat, are there marks? Mina gasped. How could you know that? Van Helsing gently brushed aside Lucy's collar. 2 tiny punctures. Perfect. Unhealed. His face hardened. He asked Mina to leave? Asked the servants to leave? Only Arthur and Seward remained. The door closed. The air changed. What I tell you now, Van Helsing said carefully, will sound insane. Arthur stiffened. But this young woman's life depends on whether you listen. He paused. Miss Lucy is being preyed upon by a vampire. Seward stared at him, unblinking. Professor, he said carefully, that is folklore. Myth. Peasant superstition. Van Helsing met his gaze without flinching. I wish it were. He spoke of Eastern Europe. Of cases dismissed by doctors who later buried their patients. Of creatures that fed slowly, methodically, until nothing remained. The wounds are not disease, he said. They are invitation. Arthur stood abruptly, rage flashing across his face. This is grotesque, he snapped. You're telling me my fiancée is being attacked by a monster, as if we live in the Middle Ages? Yes, Van Helsing replied calmly. That is exactly what I am telling you. Silence followed. Heavy. Crushing. Each night it comes, Van Helsing continued. Each night it takes from her. Not much, but enough. Arthur felt his stomach drop. If she dies, Van Helsing said quietly, she will not rest. The words struck harder than any accusation. She will become what hunts her. Arthur's voice broke. If this is true, how do we stop it? Van Helsing's eyes softened. Lucy's mother loved her fiercely. Mrs. Westenra was frail, her heart weakened by years of illness, but her devotion was absolute. She did not understand Van Helsing's warnings. To her, garlic was superstition. The smell was suffocating. Lucy seemed uncomfortable. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, Mrs. Westenra acted out of love. She removed the garlic from the windows. opened the glass to let in air. She smiled to herself, unaware she had dismantled the final barrier. The knight answered immediately. A shape appeared outside the window. Massive. Gray. A wolf larger than any natural creature, its eyes burning red with an intelligence that had no place in an animal's skull. It saw everything. Lucy asleep. Mrs. Westenra dozing in her chair. It rose and smashed through the window. Glass exploded inward. Mrs. Westenra woke screaming. She saw the beast, clutched her chest, and her heart failed before her body struck the floor. Lucy watched, frozen. Unable to scream. Unable to move. The wolf's form blurred. Bones shifted. Fur receded. And where the beast had stood, a man straightened. Tall. Pale. Immaculate. Eyes glowing red. Count Dracula smiled. "Do not fear," he said softly. "I have not come to harm you." His voice wrapped around her thoughts like velvet chains. "I have come to give you a gift." Lucy tried to reach for the crucifix. Her arm would not move. Whether terror held her or something else entirely, she did not know. "The gift of eternity," he whispered. He bent close. Fangs extended. "You will never be alone again." Pain flared, then numbness. Blood left her in great, unstoppable gulps. Life followed. By the time Van Helsing burst into the room, the window was shattered. Mrs. Westenra lay dead. Lucy was barely breathing. And the monster was gone. They tried everything. Another transfusion. Then another. Seward gave blood. Quincy Morris followed. Van Helsing offered his own, too old, too thin, but willing. Lucy lingered. Fading. Unreachable. On September 20th, 1897, Lucy Westenra died. Arthur held her hand. Van Helsing prayed in Dutch. Seward turned away. The room felt hollowed out. Van Helsing closed her eyes and made the sign of the cross. "May God receive her," he murmured. But his expression did not soften. Because he knew death had not claimed Lucy. She was buried in the Westenra crypt at Highgate Cemetery. The funeral was quiet. Arthur was shattered. He blamed himself. Van Helsing said little. He watched the grave. Measured the earth. Listened. A week later, newspapers carried small notices. Nothing dramatic. Just missing children near Hampstead. 2. Maybe 3. They were found later. Alive. But changed. Pale. Weak. With strange marks on their throats. The papers gave the culprit a name. The Bluffer Lady. They laughed it off. They always did. But Van Helsing did not laugh. Because he knew Lucy had risen. A child's sob echoed down a London street, thin and terrified. Then it stopped. There are deaths that end suffering. And there are deaths that begin it. The children were never gone for long. They vanished overnight, only hours at a time, and were found again at dawn wandering streets and doorways in a daze. Crying. Confused. Unable to explain where they had been. But their throats told the story. 2 small punctures. Always the same. When questioned, their accounts aligned with chilling precision. A lady. Beautiful. Golden-haired. She spoke kindly. Promised comfort. Drew them close. And then there was nothing. Darkness. The newspapers gave her a name, and laughed as they printed it. The Bluffer Lady. A child's mispronunciation turned into a joke. Van Helsing did not laugh. He gathered them together. Arthur Holmwood. John Seward. Quincy Morris. He did not soften his words. "Lucy is no longer at rest," he said quietly. "She is dead, yes, but she walks." Arthur exploded. "You dare speak of her like that? She is gone. She is at peace." Van Helsing met his fury with compassion. "I would give my own life if that were true." Then he made his offer. "Come with me tonight. If I am wrong, if I am mad, you may condemn me. I will not resist." Arthur agreed, because doubt had become unbearable. They entered Highgate Cemetery beneath a moon veiled in thin cloud. The iron gate to the Westenra crypt groaned as it opened. Stone steps descended into cold darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and old grief. Van Helsing pried open Lucy's coffin. The lid fell back. It was empty. Arthur staggered. "This proves nothing," he whispered desperately. Van Helsing raised a hand. "Wait." They stood in silence. Minutes stretched. Then footsteps sounded. Soft. Measured. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. A woman in white. Her dress was stained with dirt and darkened with blood. Golden hair spilled loose around her shoulders. Lucy. And not Lucy. Her beauty remained, but everything human had been stripped away. In her arms she carried a child. Limp. Unconscious. Fresh wounds darkened his throat. "Lucy," Arthur breathed. She smiled. Not kindly. Not lovingly. "My love," she said softly. "Come to me. I can give you forever." She released the child. He struck the stone floor without waking. Arthur froze. Van Helsing stepped forward, crucifix raised. The creature hissed, her face twisting with fury. "You cannot take him from me. You are no longer Lucy," Van Helsing said. "And you must be freed." With a scream of rage, she fled into the darkness. At dawn, they returned. Lucy lay in her coffin once more. Peaceful. Beautiful. As if nothing had touched her. Van Helsing positioned the stake. Arthur took the hammer. "Strike," Van Helsing whispered. "And know this is mercy." Arthur raised the hammer. His hands shook. Tears fell freely. Then he struck. A scream tore through the crypt. Not human. Not living. Then silence. Love had done what science could not. But the war had only begun. A hammer was raised. A breath held too long. Mercy does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it must be forced through the heart. "You are not killing her," Van Helsing said softly. "You are freeing her." Arthur stood over the coffin, trembling so violently he feared he might drop the hammer. Lucy lay before him, beautiful and serene, untouched by decay. She looked as if she were merely asleep, waiting for him to wake her. He leaned closer. "I love you," he whispered. "Forgive me." He struck. The stake pierced her heart with a sound like splitting wood. Lucy's eyes flew open. Her mouth stretched wide in a scream that was not pain but rage. Pure, ancient fury tore from her throat, echoing through the crypt like a curse. Her body convulsed violently. Hands clawed upward. Fingers grasped for Arthur's throat. Arthur screamed and struck again. And again. Each blow drove the stake deeper. Each strike shattered what remained of the creature inside her. Tears streamed down Arthur's face. Then the change came. The snarl faded. The hatred drained from her eyes. Her body relaxed. And for one impossible moment, Lucy was there. Truly there. Her gaze met Arthur's. Human. Clear. Grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. Then the illusion collapsed. Her body aged rapidly. Skin grayed. Lips thinned. Beauty drained away like water through sand. What remained was only a corpse. Peaceful. Final. Van Helsing did not hesitate. The ritual was not finished. With grim precision, he severed Lucy's head. The saw bit through bone. There was no ceremony. Only necessity. Garlic was packed into her mouth. A crucifix was placed upon her chest. "This is done," Van Helsing said quietly. "She is free." The coffin was sealed. The crypt closed behind them. Arthur never spoke of that night again. Officially, Lucy Westenra died of illness. The newspapers stopped printing stories about missing children. The Bloofer lady vanished from memory. London exhaled. And moved on. Van Helsing did not. Because Lucy had not been the disease. She had been a symptom. While they stood in the cemetery ending one horror, another unfolded elsewhere. Mina Harker was alone. Jonathan had returned at last. Broken. Haunted. Alive. They married quickly, desperately, clinging to normalcy like survivors clinging to wreckage. That night, Jonathan left Mina alone. He believed she was safe. He was wrong. Dracula had noticed her from the beginning. Not for her beauty, but for her mind. Her strength. Her resistance. She was not prey. She was worthy. Mina woke to find him standing over her bed. No sound. No warning. Red eyes gleaming in the dark. She tried to scream. His hand covered her mouth. Ice cold. Hush, he whispered. I am not here to kill you. His breath brushed her cheek. I am here to claim you. You destroyed Lucy, he murmured. For that, I will take something greater. He bit into his own wrist. Blood poured. He forced her mouth to it. Drink. Mina resisted, but her body betrayed her. The blood burned. It tasted wrong. Her soul recoiled as her body craved it. The bond formed. Irrevocable. Dracula released her. Smiled. You are mine now, he said softly. No wall will hide you. No prayer will sever us. Then he was gone. Mina collapsed, shaking. Something whispered inside her mind. His voice. When Jonathan returned, he found her broken on the floor. She told him everything. Jonathan's face strained of color. Lucy had been saved by death. Mina was still alive. Still human. Still contaminated. If Dracula died, she might be freed. If he reached her again, she would become something far worse. At dawn, they gathered at Seward's asylum. Van Helsing. Arthur Holmwood. John Seward. Quincy Morris. Jonathan Harker. And Mina. She insisted on being there. This is my soul, she said. I will not be protected from the truth. Jonathan brought his journal. The account of the castle. And he was already inside their walls. Steel wheels screamed against rail. A whistle cried out like an animal in pain. There are hunts where the monster runs. And there are hunts where the monster waits, and lets time do the killing. There were 6 of them. No soldiers. No armies. No divine champions. Just 6 people, ordinary and exhausted and terrified, armed with faith, sharpened wood, and the refusal to surrender what they loved. Van Helsing. Jonathan Harker. Mina Harker. John Seward. Arthur Holmwood. Quincy Morris. Against them stood a creature that had endured for centuries. A being who summoned storms, commanded wolves, slipped through walls as mist and crossed skies as bat. A thing that had watched civilizations rot into dust. On paper, it was madness. But monsters do not fight paper. They fight will. Dracula possessed strength beyond muscle. He possessed patience beyond time. But there were 2 things he lacked. The first was desperation. The second was love. They were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to save. And that made them dangerous. Mina was their greatest weapon. And their greatest liability. The blood bond between her and Dracula had fused their minds into a thin, bleeding bridge. Under Van Helsing's careful hypnosis, performed only at sunrise and sunset when the Count drifted between worlds, Mina could see. Not imagine. Not infer. Witness. Her eyes would glaze. Her breathing would slow. Her voice would fall into something distant, detached from her body. What do you see? Van Helsing would ask. I hear water, she whispered once. Lapping. Slapping against wood. She shivered. He is boxed. Buried. But awake. A pause. The voices above are foreign. Rough. He is moving upriver. Van Helsing's jaw tightened. The Danube, he murmured. She nodded weakly. Dracula had fled England by sea, back the way he had come. Varna. The Black Sea. Then inland by river, hidden like cargo, smuggled home inside his last coffin of earth. It was cautious. Deliberate. Slow. And that slowness was their only advantage. If trains held. If weather allowed. If fate did not betray them. They might reach the Carpathians first. They might reach the castle before nightfall claimed him again. Each trance burned Mina from the inside. When she woke, she gasped like a drowning woman dragged back to air. Her hand flew to her throat, to her forehead. The mark there burned redder every day. Like a brand. Like ownership. Van Helsing ended each session immediately. "Come back," he would say gently. "Come back to us." And she would. But each time, a little less. The change did not arrive all at once. It crept. Mina's skin paled until light seemed to pass through it. Her eyes darkened. She complained of cold, constant and bone-deep, no matter how warm the train compartment grew. Jonathan wrapped her in coats. Held her close. She shivered anyway. Food repulsed her. Meat made her nauseous. Bread sat heavy in her stomach. Water was all she could manage. And even that left her weak. She was shrinking. Withering. Being reclaimed cell by cell. No one spoke of what waited at the end of this road. No one said the words "if we are too late." Because they all knew. Mina's body was keeping time. And time was winning. The monster fled toward home. The hunters chased toward oblivion. And between them, a woman was slowly vanishing. The train rattled through darkness. Not forward. Downward. Corruption does not always weaken. Sometimes it sharpens. Mina was fading. And yet she was awakening. Her hearing sharpened until whispers bled through walls. She could hear voices several compartments away, individual heartbeats layered beneath conversation, the subtle panic hidden inside a stranger's breath. Smells became unbearable. Blood cut through the air like perfume. Sweet. Metallic. Alive. It made her mouth fill with saliva, and when she understood why, she retched in horror. She stopped sitting near windows. Even dull daylight pierced her eyes like needles. She wore darkened glasses. Curtains stayed drawn. The world outside had become hostile to her. The wound on her forehead refused to fade. The place where the consecrated wafer had burned her was no longer healing. It was declaring itself. Red. Angry. A sigil. When they passed churches, Mina gasped and doubled over. When they crossed graveyards or holy ground, the mark burned as if freshly branded. Once, when a distant church bell rang, she screamed. Jonathan held her as she shook. "I'm becoming like him," she sobbed. "I can feel it. Something inside me is changing its shape." Her hands trembled. Soon there will be nothing left to save. Jonathan spoke words of hope. He meant them. But terror lived behind his eyes. He had seen what waited at the end of this road. He had seen Lucy's transformation. He knew what mercy looked like when it carried a hammer. And in his darkest moments, he wondered if he would be strong enough to do it again. This time to his wife. He crushed the thought immediately. There was no room for it. Only the hunt. Jonathan cornered Van Helsing one night. "How long?" The professor did not soften his answer. "Days," he said quietly. "Perhaps a week." He listed the signs. No tolerance for sunlight. Pain at the name of God. A slowing heart. When those appear, Van Helsing said, the end is near. Jonathan swallowed. "And if we kill him first?" "She will be free." "And if we don't?" Van Helsing did not answer. The train stopped in Budapest. Beyond that were only dirt roads. Only villages clinging to hillsides. Only the old world. They hired horses and a wagon. The air changed immediately. Thicker. Older. The Carpathians loomed ahead like teeth breaking through the earth. At a monastery hidden among the foothills, Van Helsing collected what he had arranged. Stakes. Holy water. Blessed wafers. Crucifixes. Rifles loaded with silver. Knives etched with prayer. "Faith and steel," Van Helsing said grimly. "We use everything." The villagers watched them silently, eyes hollow with knowledge. When asked about the castle, hands crossed chests. Mouths closed. Finally, an old woman spoke. You seek the devil's house, she said. What madness drives you? Van Helsing met her gaze. We are going to kill him. The woman wept. They had left the modern world behind. Ahead lay mountains that remembered blood. And at their heart, a castle that had never learned to die. A mountain wind exhaled, slow, deliberate, knowing. Some wounds do not bleed. They announce ownership. The old woman did not need explanation. Her gaze lingered on Mina's forehead, on the raw, inflamed scar that refused to fade. She studied the unnatural pallor of her skin, the bruised shadows beneath her eyes, the way Mina stood slightly apart from the others, as if the earth itself rejected her weight. Understanding settled into the woman's face like mourning. The night creature has marked her, she murmured. You have come too late. Jonathan stepped forward instantly. No, he said forcefully. She is not gone. Not yet. The woman looked at him with profound sadness. Young man, she replied softly, you are already running from the clock, and it is faster than you. Still, she did not turn them away. She folded her hands and nodded once. I will pray, she said. For her. For all of you. Then she told them what she knew. The road. The forgotten path. The ascent through the Borgo Pass where old trade routes had rotted back into wilderness. The fortress is not merely stone, she whispered. It is his spine. His breath. His memory. She gestured toward the mountains. The ground listens there. The darkness obeys. Even if you reach him before he crosses the threshold, he will still be surrounded by power you cannot see. Van Helsing inclined his head. We understand, he said calmly. But retreat is no longer possible. The woman reached beneath her cloak and pressed something into Mina's palm. A small cross. Roughly shaped. Darkened by age. Its edges worn smooth by generations of fearful hands. It guarded my bloodline, the woman said. Mothers gave it to daughters when the nights grew dangerous. Mina tried to return it at once. Sacred objects burned her now, sent lightning through her nerves. The woman refused. The pain means it resists what is inside you, she said firmly. That is good. That is hope. She closed Mina's fingers around it. You will need every barrier you can find. They rode on. The path narrowed into little more than memory, a thread of stone and dirt winding upward into the spine of the Carpathians. With every mile, the land grew harsher. Trees bent at unnatural angles, stripped and twisted by centuries of wind. Rocks jutted like broken teeth. Shadows gathered in places where no shadows should linger. The air itself felt watchful. Unforgiving. This was not merely a country. It was claimed. The wind screamed through the passes, sometimes shrill, sometimes low, almost forming words. Almost forming laughter. Jonathan recognized the route. He had walked it once before, full of optimism and ignorance. Now it felt narrower. Steeper. As if the mountain resented his return. This was the Count's birthplace. The soil had known his footsteps for centuries. And it did not welcome intruders. At night, the howling began. Not random. Not chaotic. Calls answered by distant echoes, timed and deliberate. The wolves were not hunting food. They were reporting. Twice, while the group made camp, eyes appeared beyond the firelight. Red. Unblinking. Intelligent. They vanished the moment a crucifix was raised or a rifle cracked through the dark. But the message was clear. They were being measured. Counted. Mina felt it before anyone spoke it aloud. He knows, she whispered. Dracula was not fleeing. He was preparing. Drawing strength back into himself. Calling his servants. Turning the land into a weapon. They were no longer traveling toward a destination. They were approaching a will. And it was waiting. The voice that emerged from her mouth was deep, measured, ancient. Each syllable carried the weight of centuries. "You are very brave," it said softly. "And very foolish." Jonathan recoiled. Van Helsing did not. "This ground is mine," the voice continued. "These mountains remember me. Their blood is older than your faith." Mina's lips curved into a smile she had never worn in life. "Turn back," Dracula said through her. "Leave the woman. She is already claimed." Van Helsing leaned close to Mina's face, his voice steady as iron. "We will not retreat." The smile faltered. "She does not belong to you," Van Helsing continued. "She belongs to herself. To the living. To God." "You speak of theft," he said, "but you are the thief. You steal breath. You steal futures. You steal souls you cannot create." The fire snapped loudly. For a moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Mina's head tilted unnaturally. "And me?" Dracula laughed softly through her throat. "I have watched kingdoms rot. I have drowned hunters in their own blood." Her eyes opened, fully now. They were not her eyes. "What makes you believe you will succeed where all others failed?" Van Helsing did not raise his voice. "Because they hunted you," he said calmly. "We are fighting for someone. We do not seek glory," Van Helsing continued. "We do not seek revenge." His hand rested lightly over Mina's heart. "We seek salvation. And love," he said quietly, "is something you will never understand." For the first time. The smile vanished. Mina screamed again. Her body convulsed violently. Then collapsed. The bond loosened. The presence withdrew. Mina lay unconscious, breathing shallowly. Jonathan held her, sobbing into her hair. Van Helsing stared into the darkness beyond the firelight. He knew what that exchange meant. The Count had spoken. Not to threaten, but to measure. The summons had been answered. The challenge had been accepted. And from this night forward, only one thing remained. Blood would decide the ending. A fire guttered low. The valley exhaled cold. There comes a point in every pursuit when the prey does not run. It calls. The race was tightening. They all felt it. Every mile climbed through the mountains had shaved away time they no longer possessed. By the final night before the Borgo Pass, exhaustion had hollowed them to the bone. They made camp in a narrow valley where the rock walls pressed close, as if the earth itself were listening. Van Helsing worked quickly. He traced a wide circle around the camp. Holy water splashed onto stone, communion wafers crushed into powder and mixed with soil. The barriers shimmered faintly in the firelight, invisible but absolute. A line no undead thing could cross. Or so they prayed. Just before midnight, Mina screamed. Not fear. Not pain. Something deeper. Something summoned. Jonathan bolted upright and ran to the tent. Mina's body arched violently, her limbs jerking against the blankets as if seized by unseen hands. Her eyes rolled back, showing only white. Foam gathered at the corners of her mouth. And the mark on her forehead. It burned. Not metaphorically. It glowed red-hot, pulsing like a living wound. Van Helsing reached her first. His face drained of color. "He is calling her," he said sharply. "The bond has matured. He is summoning what belongs to him." Jonathan's voice broke. "Then stop it. Do something." Van Helsing shook his head. "It is too late for prevention." The words struck like a death sentence. "We can only contain her. Hold her within the circle. Wait for the call to loosen." They restrained her as gently as they could. Mina fought like someone drowning. Her strength was unnatural, far greater than her wasted body should allow. She screamed words that made no sense. Her consciousness was gone. Her mind dragged elsewhere. Pulled along a road only one being controlled. Then she went still. Her chest rose once. Slow. Deliberate. And when she spoke, it was not Mina. A wind rose suddenly. Not natural. Summoned. When a monster stops hiding, it invites judgment. The borrowed smile vanished from Mina's face. Her features twisted, not in pain, but in fury. A fury that did not belong to her. Then come, the voice snarled through her lips. Climb to my throne. I will teach you what becomes of those who defy me. Her body collapsed instantly. As if a cord had been cut. Jonathan caught her before she struck the ground. She lay motionless in his arms, weightless, freezing, breath barely fogging the air. Van Helsing knelt beside her, fingers pressed to her throat. She lives, he said grimly. But the bond is nearly sealed. He looked at them all. One day. Perhaps less. Mina woke at dawn. But the woman who opened her eyes was already retreating. Her gaze was distant. Unfocused. Something predatory watched from behind it. She could no longer endure daylight, not even the weak gray glow filtering through cloud. Light burned her skin, sent tremors through her body. They built a litter for her, wrapping it in heavy cloth and blankets. She lay inside it quietly. Too quietly. I'm disappearing, she whispered to Jonathan as he walked beside her. I can feel it happening. Her fingers tightened around his hand. Promise me something. His throat closed. If you fail, if I die, don't let me rise. The words cut deeper than any blade. Promise me you'll end it. Jonathan could not speak. He nodded. Mina smiled faintly. Thank you, she whispered. Remember me as I was. Late in the day, they reached a ridge. A wagon creaked along it. Driven by men in dark coats. And on that wagon, a coffin-sized box. The final one. He's still inside it, Van Helsing said. Still bound. Still vulnerable. Hope flared like a dying ember. If we reach that box before sunset, he said, we can end this. They spurred their horses downhill. The men on the wagon saw them coming. Whips cracked. Horses screamed. The wagon lurched forward. Above them, the bats screamed louder. The sun slid closer to the horizon. Mina lay motionless in the litter, breast shallow, skin gray. The castle loomed larger with every heartbeat. This was it. One chance. Quincy Morris surged ahead. Riding like a man born to the saddle. He pulled alongside the wagon, raised his revolver. And fired. Not at flesh. At rope. The shot snapped the bindings. The box shifted. The wagon jolted violently. Men shouted. Weapons were drawn. But the hunters did not slow. They could not. Because if the sun fell, everything would be lost. This was no longer pursuit. It was execution delayed by seconds. And the night was closing in. The first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in weeks crossed his face. It's working, he said. The curse is breaking. Mina's body was purging the corruption. Her skin, death pale for days, was flushing with color. Her breathing, once shallow and strained, deepened steadily. The mark on her forehead, the angry red burn that had branded her as the vampire's victim, was fading. The scar tissue smoothed, thinned, and vanished as if it had never existed. She gasped, drawing in a massive breath, like someone breaking the surface after drowning. Her eyes flew open. Clear. Bright. Human. Jonathan, she whispered. He was crying openly now, clutching her hands. I'm here. I'm here, Mina. You're back. You're you again. She touched her own face, as if needing proof she still existed. Is he dead? Jonathan nodded, voice shaking. Gone. Dust. It's over, Mina. It's finally over. She began to weep, tears of relief, joy, and exhaustion spilling freely. I can't feel him anymore, she said through sobs. He's not in my head. It's quiet. It's finally quiet. Van Helsing examined her forehead carefully. The mark was completely gone. The transformation has been completely reversed, he said softly, off-filling his voice. She is free. Truly free. They helped Mina sit upright. She was weak, her body had been failing for days and would need time to recover, but she was alive. Human. Saved. The nightmare was over. Then they heard the groan. Quincy Morris was on the ground, one hand pressed tightly to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and steady. During the fight with the gypsies, in the desperate rush to reach the box, he had been stabbed. A knife driven between his ribs by one of the men guarding the wagon. In the chaos, no one had noticed. Quincy himself hadn't said a word, focused only on finishing the task. Now, as the adrenaline drained away, the wound revealed itself. Arthur and Seward rushed to him. They tore open his shirt, trying to see the damage. It was bad. Very bad. The blade had gone deep, possibly puncturing a lung, certainly severing major vessels. "We need to get him to a doctor," Seward said urgently. "We need to." "No," Quincy said quietly. He was smiling. "It was all right, boys. I'm not going to make it. I can feel it." Arthur's voice broke. "Don't say that. First Lucy, and now you. How much loss can one man bear?" Quincy looked past them. To Mina. Alive. Sitting upright. The mark gone from her forehead. "We did it," he said softly. "Look at her. She's free. She's going to live." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Worth it. All of it. Worth it to see that." "Quincy," Jonathan began. "No. Listen to me." His voice was weakening, but his eyes were clear. "You all came here to save Mrs. Harker. And we did it. We actually did it." A faint smile touched his lips. How many people get to say they killed a monster and saved a soul in the same day? That's not a bad way to go out, boys. Not bad at all. Mina crawled to his side, tears streaming down her face. "Don't leave us," she pleaded. "You saved my life. Let us save yours." Quincy lifted his hand with effort and touched her face gently. "You're going to be fine, ma'am," he said softly. "You're going to have a long, happy life with that husband of yours." His breathing slowed. "You'll have children. And grandchildren. And you'll never have to fear the dark again." A whip cracked. Wood splintered. Hooves screamed. Immortality ends the same way everything else does. With impact. The rope gave way with a violent snap. The crate lurched. For a heartbeat it balanced. Then chaos swallowed everything. Arthur and Jonathan surged forward, abandoning their horses, throwing themselves onto the wagon as it rattled out of control. Hands grabbed. Knuckles split. Bodies slammed together in desperate, wordless combat. The gypsies fought savagely, knives flashing, clubs swinging, but desperation is a force of its own. The wagon tipped. Wood screamed. The crate tore free and struck the ground with a thunderous crack. The lid split. Van Helsing and Seward were already running. Stakes raised. Hammers ready. The sun clung to the horizon, nothing more than a dying smear of red. Seconds. Jonathan reached the box first. He drove the crowbar beneath the broken lid. Wood shrieked. Nails tore loose. The lid flew aside. Inside, buried in dark native soil, lay Dracula. Not sleeping. Watching. Eyes open. Burning. Hate radiated from him like heat from a furnace. His lips curled back, revealing fangs gleaming with promise. "You are too late," he hissed. "Night is mine." Jonathan raised his blade. "Not today." The sun touched the edge of the world. The mountain turned blood red. And time broke. Jonathan moved first. Not thinking. Not hesitating. And for the briefest instant, something else looked out through his eyes. Something old. Human. Tired. Relieved. His lips moved. Barely a sound. It is finished. He did not fall. He collapsed inward. His flesh dried and cracked. Bone fractured into powder. Clothing withered. His body disintegrated, not violently, but inevitably, as centuries of stolen time reclaimed their debt all at once. In seconds, Dracula became dust. Gray. Ancient. Carried away by the wind. Nothing remained. The gypsies fled screaming. Weapons dropped. Contracts forgotten. They ran toward a castle that no longer had a master. The hunter stood motionless. Breathing. Staring. It was done. Then a scream tore through the valley. Mina. Jonathan ran to the litter. Van Helsing was already there. Mina's body convulsed violently. Her spine arched. Her hands clawed at the air. She screamed as something broke inside her. Not metaphorically. Physically. The bond shattered. Chains snapping free. The voice vanished. The presence evaporated. The poison burned its way out. She screamed once more. Then collapsed. Still. Van Helsing knelt beside her. Checked her pulse. Her breath. Then he smiled. A real smile. She is free. A single breath, he said softly, then another. The curse is gone. Then silence. Quincy Morris's lips curved faintly one last time. And you'll tell them stories, he murmured, his voice thinning like smoke. Maybe you'll mention the foolish American who chased danger just to see what it looked like up close. A pause. That's enough eternity for me. His fingers slackened. His breathing slowed. Stuttered. And stopped. As the final edge of sunlight vanished behind the Carpathian peaks, as night claimed the mountains once more, Quincy Morris closed his eyes forever, and died smiling. No terror. No regret. Only peace. They buried him where the road curved toward the castle, close enough that the wind still carried echoes of the nightmare, far enough that it could never touch him again. No marble. No carved name. Just a cross, rough and uneven, fashioned from splintered wood torn from the vampire's shattered coffin. The prison that once carried darkness now marked the rest of the man who helped end it. Van Helsing spoke prayers in 3 tongues. Each word heavy. Each syllable final. They swore then, quietly, fiercely, that Quincy Morris would not dissolve into memory. That his life would matter. That his sacrifice would echo. One man gone. Countless lives spared. They left Transylvania at dawn. There was nothing left to fight. Castle Dracula stood hollow, its chambers choked with dust, its halls stripped of presence. The stone itself felt abandoned, as though whatever intelligence had once animated it had been ripped away. The women Jonathan once feared were nowhere to be found. Whether they were undone with their master or fled into forgotten ravines, no one could say. The land exhaled. The nightmare had released its grip. The journey west passed in hushed exhaustion. No one spoke of victory. They carried it the way survivors carry wreckage, carefully, silently. Grief traveled beside them. So did relief. And Mina, alive, unclaimed, was proof that something beautiful had survived the darkness. By the time London rose through the fog once more, strength had returned to her limbs. Color warmed her skin. The sun no longer burned her eyes. Sacred symbols rested harmlessly against her chest. Only the memories remained. And they would never fade. Time reclaimed them, slowly. Dr. Seward returned to his patients, though some nights he listened more closely to screams, knowing now what horrors could hide behind madness. Arthur Holmwood poured his inheritance into healing, hospitals, wards, research, as though saving strangers might quiet the guilt he carried for the one woman he could not. Van Helsing returned to Amsterdam, no longer merely a scholar. He had seen truth walk and bleed. His studies became warnings disguised as research. And Jonathan and Mina rebuilt, Not easily. Not quickly. But together. They had faced death side by side, and whatever cracks remained were bound tighter than fear could ever undo. 7 years later, a child was born. They named him Quincy. He grew strong. Curious. Laughing. Never knowing how close the world had come to erasing him before his first breath. When the boy was 6, they returned, not to the castle, never to the castle, but to the mountains where it ended. They stood on a ridge, their son's small hand warm between theirs. Below them, the ruins clung to stone like a dying memory, crumbling inch by inch back into the earth that had once fed it. Mina spoke quietly. Sometimes I wonder if a wolf cried somewhere far away. Just a wolf. Nothing more. The world moved on. It forgot the nights of blood and hunger. Forgot the ship of the dead. Forgot the pale figure watching London streets. But forgetting did not mean it never happened. Because evil had walked once. And it had been stopped, not by armies or angels, but by ordinary people who refused to look away. And so we leave the mountains. We leave the graves. We leave the ruins. And we return to Victorian England. To a cramped office above a London theatre. To a man bent over paper, ink staining his fingers, imagination burning brighter than belief. Not a hunter. Not a hero. Just a man with a story. His name was Bram Stoker. And from shadow, memory, and fear, he made something immortal. A gas lamp flickered. Dust drifted through its glow like ash. A clock ticked somewhere out of sight, slow, deliberate, unforgiving. Before the monster had a name, before blood-soaked pages and shadows learned to speak, there was only a man who could not sleep. By daylight hours, what little daylight he ever truly saw, he was a servant to spectacle. Bram Stoker ran the Lyceum Theatre, a cathedral of illusion in the heart of London. Every performance, every ledger, every fragile ego passed through his hands. Actors demanded praise. Investors demanded profit. Audiences demanded wonder. And towering over it all was Henry Irving, brilliant, mercurial, impossible to satisfy. Stoker managed his schedule, his moods, his ambitions, his excesses. It was a life of constant vigilance. Curtain up meant chaos. Curtain down meant collapse. Stoker's days began when others were finishing dinner. His nights ended when the city was already stirring again. He slept in fragments. He lived on exhaustion. And yet, his mind never rested. In the quiet hours, those thin moments between night and dawn, Stoker dreamed of something else. Not applause. Not prestige. Not theater. Immortality. He wanted to write something that endured. Something that lingered. Something that crawled into the collective imagination and refused to leave. He had tried before. A few short works. A novel that vanished without a trace. Reviews that landed with a dull thud of indifference. Each failure sharpened the hunger. He did not want success. He wanted legacy. But inspiration does not obey exhaustion. And for years it refused him. Then came the rarest of luxuries. A holiday. With his wife. With his young son. Away from London's smoke and deadlines. Whitby. A seaside town poised between beauty and decay, where cliffs broke sharply into the sea and the past refused to stay buried. Victorians adored it for its air, its views, its gentility. Stoker felt something else entirely. An unease he could not name. He walked for hours. Along the harbor. Across the cliffs. Through narrow streets that twisted like memory. Above it all stood the abbey, roofless, skeletal, devoured by time. Below it, the graveyard leaned toward the sea, headstones worn smooth by centuries of salt wind. Stoker climbed the steps and sat among the dead. And there, staring out across the North Sea, something shifted. A question surfaced, uninvited. What if something came from out there? Not a storm. Not a ship of trade. Something old. Something patient. What if it arrived unseen? And brought the night with it? Stoker had read vampire tales before. Everyone had. They were elegant phantoms. Romantic predators. shadows that flirted and vanished. But they were never solid, never strategic, never believable. He imagined something different. A creature with logistics, with planning, with history. A predator that understood modernity and intended to exploit it. Gas lamps, railways, crowded cities. A monster not afraid of progress, but delighted by it. His pulse quickened. For the first time in years, the fatigue lifted. He wrote. Fragments. Images. Questions. A ship. A storm. A harbor. A graveyard above the sea. The pages filled faster than he could control them. Something had found him. Days later, inside the Whitby Public Library, chance intervened. Stoker pulled a book from the shelf, one he had not been searching for. A dry historical text. Obscure. Forgotten. Inside it, a single paragraph described a brutal prince from Eastern Europe. A warlord. A tyrant. A man feared even in death. And there, buried in academic prose, was the name. Dracula. Stoker froze. The word struck like a physical blow. Not elegant. Not poetic. But heavy. Foreign. Ancient. Hungry. He said it aloud once, quietly, and felt the shape of it settle in his mouth. This was no phantom. This was a title. From that moment on, there was no turning back. He read relentlessly. Folklore. Travel journals. Superstitions whispered by mountain villages. He haunted the British Museum, poring over texts most scholars ignored. He wrote letters to experts he had never met. He filled notebooks with rules, weaknesses, contradictions. He was not writing fantasy. He was constructing a predator. One that could survive scrutiny. One that could convince. And slowly, almost without his realizing it, the monster stopped feeling invented. It felt remembered. What Bram Stoker did not know, what he could never have known, was that he was not merely creating a story. He was assembling fragments of something older. Something that had already walked these shores. Something that had arrived once. By ship. In silence. A candle guttered. Ink bled into paper. Outside, London slept, unaware of what was being assembled in the dark. Monsters are not always born in screams. Sometimes they are written into existence, line by line, after midnight. Slowly, almost painfully slowly, Bram Stoker built the story. Not in bursts of inspiration. Not in manic flashes. But in stolen hours. When the doors of the Lyceum Theatre finally closed, when the applause faded, when actors departed and gaslights dimmed, Stoker stayed awake. From 1890 to 1897, night after night, he returned to his desk, exhausted, hollow-eyed, yet unable to stop. The theater devoured his days. The monster claimed his nights. This was not passion. This was obsession. He did not write blindly. He planned like a general preparing a campaign. Hundreds of handwritten notes. Margins crowded with revisions. Loose pages filled with rules, what the creature could do, and what it could not. He drew maps of Transylvania from atlases he never set foot near. He traced mountain passes. Marked rivers. Measured distances. He sketched Castle Dracula as if it were real, floor plans, staircases, towers, locked doors. A fortress designed not just to imprison victims, but to control them. He tracked time obsessively. Who traveled when? Who knew what, and when they knew it? How long a letter would take to arrive? How much blood could be lost before death followed? This was not fantasy. It was logistics. Eventually, Stoker made a decision that defined everything. He would not tell the story as a story. He would present it as evidence. Diaries. Private letters. Ship logs. Newspaper clippings. Phonograph recordings. New technology, unsettlingly intimate. The structure did something dangerous. It erased the guiding voice. There was no narrator to reassure the reader. No authority to promise safety. Only fragments. Testimonies. Records left behind by people who didn't yet understand they were already doomed. It felt less like fiction. And more like a file assembled after a catastrophe. This served a deeper purpose. Victorian England worshipped progress, railways, telegrams, blood transfusions, reason, science. So Stoker weaponized it. Modern tools were turned against something impossibly old. Trains raced against centuries. Phonographs preserved voices that should have died. Medicine battled a disease that was not a disease at all. Faith stood beside science, not in opposition, but in uneasy alliance. Against darkness. Most importantly, Stoker refused to make his monster foolish. His Count Dracula was not a beast snarling in crypts. He was educated, patient, strategic. A nobleman who understood paperwork. A conqueror who studied legal systems. A predator who bought property instead of seizing it. He planned his arrival like an invasion, quiet, bureaucratic, lawful. And that made him terrifying. Because he could exist unnoticed. By the time Stoker finished, what lay before him was not merely a horror story. It was an invasion narrative. A meditation on disease and contamination. A reflection of Victorian fears about sexuality and control. A parable about foreign influence and moral decay. A Gothic romance soaked in blood and repression. It was dense, strange, uncomfortable. And Stoker had no idea if anyone would want it. In May of 1897, Dracula was published. 400 pages. Yellow cloth binding. Red lettering like dried blood. The reviews were uncertain. Some praised its tension. Others recoiled. One dismissed it as gruesome and repulsive, a phrase that cut deeper than praise ever could. And worst of all, it did not sell. Not loudly. Not triumphantly. A few thousand copies. Mostly to lending libraries. Then silence. No fame. No fortune. Stoker earned almost nothing. He returned to the Lyceum. Returned to exhaustion. Returned to obscurity. He wrote more novels. More horrors. More strange ideas. None mattered. His
Because
name
some
faded
stories
even
do
as
not
his
awaken
creation
immediately.
waited. Some require time. Time, and blood, and memory. Bram Stoker did not live to see what he had unleashed. But the monster he wrote was only sleeping. A church bell tolled in the distance, hollow and unresolved. Wind moved through stone corridors that no longer existed. Monsters endure when they obey rules. What made Dracula terrifying was not his power alone. It was his consistency. He recoiled from consecrated symbols. He could not cross a threshold uninvited. He cast no reflection. He required soil from his homeland to rest. He burned beneath the sun. These limitations did something essential. They made him believable. Not a ghost. Not a hallucination. But a predator bound by laws, like an undiscovered species operating just beyond the edge of known biology. Dangerous. But not invincible. And that balance, the fragile line between helplessness and hope, gave the hunters meaning, urgency, terror. Because if rules exist, then survival is possible. Bram Stoker understood that fear must feel close to be effective. So he chained the supernatural to the familiar. Real towns. Real streets. Real railways. Whitby. London. The Carpathian Mountains. Places readers could visit. Places they might already know. He armed his characters with the tools of modernity, telegraphs clicking like nervous hearts, trains slicing through distance, phonographs capturing voices meant to vanish. And he presented everything as documentation, evidence, testimony, records left behind after catastrophe. Not a fairy tale. A case file. The result was devastating. The unreal felt disturbingly plausible. But Dracula survives because it is not truly about vampires. It is about contamination. The terror that something old and malignant can slip unnoticed into a confident society and rot it from the inside. It is about desire that cannot be spoken. About illness no one wants to name. About bodies betraying themselves. Dracula is the outsider who charms his way past defenses. The carrier who spreads corruption invisibly. The aristocrat who feeds upon the vulnerable while pretending refinement. He is seduction and sickness intertwined. And above all, he is death given intent. A reminder that progress cannot save us. That reason cannot bargain with the grave. That no matter how brightly the lamps burn, the night is patient. The story never stops changing. Because fear never stops evolving. In the early 20th century, Dracula became the anxiety of foreign invasion. Between wars, he reflected political dread. During the Cold War, he embodied unseen enemies and ideological infection. Later, he softened, romantic, tragic yearning. Today, he wears many masks. Disease, exploitation, addiction, desire. Each era finds its own reflection staring back through red eyes. Because at its core, Dracula speaks to what never fades. The fear of losing control. The fear of being consumed. The fear that something stronger is watching, waiting, and will take what it wants. Bram Stoker never drank from a chalice. Never slept in earth. Never escaped death. But he achieved what Dracula sought, and failed, to secure. He became undying. Through story. Through imagination. Through a narrative that sank its teeth into the human psyche and refused to let go. Bran Castle still stands. Tourists call it Dracula's home. Historians protest. Facts object. Vlad likely never lived there. The Count never existed at all. And yet people climb the steps. They peer into shadows. They feel watched. Because belief does not require truth. Only suggestion. Vampires are not real. But they live. In stories. In symbols. A single match strikes. In the dark spaces we refuse to examine, then steadies. They shape how we think about mortality. A shadow stretches across the wall, hunger, far longer eternity. Than the body that casts it. They remind us that monsters stories are rarely strangers. They are reflections. Count Dracula has worn more faces than any nightmare. He simply learned how to be remembered. More than 200 films. Thousands of adaptations. An endless procession of accents, silhouettes, teeth, and cloaks. He has stalked in black and white silence. He has bled in vivid color. He has whispered seduction. And roared like a beast. Sometimes he is a tyrant. Sometimes a lover. Sometimes a joke that still cuts too close. Yet no matter how far he bends, he never breaks. Because the shape may change. But the hunger remains. Every vampire that came after carries a trace of him. The elegant immortals. The tortured romantics. The predators in alleyways and penthouses alike. Even when the rules are rewritten, the invitation still matters. The blood still binds. The night still calls. Dracula is not copied. He is remembered, instinctively, unconsciously, like a half-forgotten warning passed down in the dark. And still, most people know the monster, but not the man who dreamed him. Bram Stoker's. In 1897, a vampire arrived in England aboard a ghost ship, silent, unnoticed, legal, documented. That arrival never truly ended. Every time a shadow feels deliberate. Every time a door seems too quiet. Every time the night feels like it is leaning closer. The ship docks again. Not in harbors, but in minds. Dracula sought eternity through blood. Bram Stoker achieved it through narrative. One fed on bodies. The other fed on imagination. Only one succeeded. Stories do not decay. They do not weaken with age. They wait, patiently, for the next listener willing to believe. Vampires are not real. But fear is. Desire is. Death is. And Dracula lives where those things intersect. In cinema flicker. In yellowed pages. In dreams that feel watched. In that moment, just before sleep, when the dark feels aware of you. The count is dead. But the story will never stop knocking. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And whatever you do tonight, don't invite him in.